Welcome to our Here to Be Heard podcast. This series is part of the larger Here to Be Heard global study at Mars to amplify and listen to the voices of women from all backgrounds and intersections of society. In the world we want tomorrow, society is inclusive. Progress has been made towards creating that world, but there's still work to do. In this series, you'll hear the unique experiences from women of Mars who come from all parts of the business to get their perspective on what needs to change for women to reach their full potential. My name is Lisa Campbell, and I'll be your host for this episode. I'm the Director of External Affairs at Mars Pet Care, and I've been with the company for 14 years now. And with me today is Nici Bush. She's the Vice President of Workplace Transformation. Nici, thanks so much for joining me today. Can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been with Mars?
Absolutely. Good to say hi, Lisa. I started in Mars in September 1992. So that is now nearly 29, well, just over 29 years ago. And um, if I kind of look back on my career, the majority of it is in supply. I joined as a graduate trainee in the UK straight after a chemistry degree. And I actually joined in sales and marketing because I thought that would be very kind of sexy and cool. And very early on in my career, found a love of working with people and working in supply. So the majority of my career, I'd say over 20 years, has been in supply. 15 of it in pet care, actually. I know you're in pet care yourself. And I've been just super fortunate to have many different roles, many different experiences. And every time I thought I might get bored, I had something new and really challenging to do.
That's fantastic. And I know you've definitely touched on this, but you have had an expansive career at Mars, and you actually, mentioned your industrial engineering background, your positions with global vice president of research and development, supply, as you mentioned, both within chocolate and at Pet Care. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've been able to be successful in some of these fields that have typically been considered to be more male dominated?
Yeah, I can certainly reflect on it. I don't think I've got the secret, but I can certainly reflect on it. I think there are different parts and different stages of my career. So I think, as I said, I joined straight from college. So I joined when I was 22 years old. I first met industrial engineering when I was a graduate trainee, and I went to France for a year, and that was the job that was open. And so I kind of worked through what that was, and I actually did it three other times during my career. But I'd say in those early stages, probably in all my 20s, it was all about fitting in. It was all about minimizing any differences I had, trying to be kind of a guy's guy kind of thing. And um, although that worked, it was also really exhausting because I was trying to be one person at work and one person at home. And it wasn't really until I got to my early 30s and I could see other women coming through. I was a plant manager in Cleveland, Tennessee when I was 32, and I could see other women coming through. And I realized that I was doing both myself and others a disservice by not um, recognizing that being a woman and being proud of being a little different, maybe talking about some things that were different. I brought a lot of care and compassion. I have a real passion for trying to get the best out of people in very different situations. And I felt like I was probably doing myself and others a disservice. And I think that's when I leaned in a little bit more into having more open conversations. Um, I'd say though, the one thing that if there was one secret that a myth I would bust, it would be every role I was in, I'd look at the people above me, particularly if there were women above me, and I'd say, "Oh, she seems to have her life together." I'm a shift manager and I'm looking at a value stream manager. Oh, they seem to have their life together. When I get there, I bet you I'll work it out. And then I was a value stream manager. I look up at the plant manager and I go, "Oh, I bet you they've got their life together." And when you're a plant
Mhm.
manager, you look up at the level above and you keep doing it. And I'd say that it's a myth, right? I've been at all different levels in the business, including the global vice president for supply, having 31 factories around the world. And we're all trying to work out how to get our lives together, and particularly in the
Hmm.
last year through COVID. And I think being honest about that, admitting that, you haven't got it sorted, that being a young mum, being a mum of teenagers, now I'm a mum of a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old, you haven't worked it out. And admitting that and then being open to that vulnerability is probably the most releasing thing you can do.
Yes, I agree. That's so true. It sounds like having strong female role models was really a turning point for you in your career to realize that you didn't just have to fit in, but that you could be, the same Nikki that you are at work, that you are at home. Was the same true from a mentorship perspective? Was it more, seeing those other female leaders out there and what they were doing, or was there more of a relationship and conversation involved?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of key people that helped me and mentored me through my career. I'd say some of them were peers, actually. So I'll think through a couple of peers who I shared some of my struggles with, and they shared theirs, and maybe pushed me to do some things that I was feeling, uh, you know, a little bit concerned that I wasn't ready for a new role or a new promotion or hadn't worked something out. And so Tracy Massey was a peer of mine when um, I was an IE in Vernon at the time. So when the national office in pet care was in Vernon in California, she was a peer of mine, and the two of us, were able to kind of share having young children. Her youngest, I think, was still under one. Mine was probably 2 or 3, and so we were trying to work that through. So I found a lot of mentorship from peers, not just from those more senior to me. Someone who was really influential early on for me was Pamela Mars. So
Hmm.
when I first came to the US, I came to Reno, Nevada, and I'd never been to Reno. I came and started working there when I was 28 years old. And at the time, she was the vice president of supply for pet care in North America. And she decided to take a career break and run a bed and breakfast out in Wyoming with her 2 young children. And I was incredibly inspired by her doing that and choosing that path because that what worked for her for a period of time. And I think that was very inspirational to me. And it may not have been my path, but what it allowed me to do was think through what are the boundaries I want to set as a young mum. I think
Hmm.
any working mum that I've ever I've talked to is a great manufacturer of guilt. So whether it's me, I manufacture guilt when I'm working that I might not be that I'm not doing enough at work because I'm focusing at home, or when I'm home with my kids, I'm feeling guilty that I'm not doing enough work. And I think one thing that helps that, it may not get rid of it, but certainly turns down that volume of guilt, is thinking about the boundaries you want to set. And certainly for me, what I realized, and I wish I'd realized it earlier, is that no one was going to set those boundaries. But if I set the boundaries, um, other people would really help me keep them.
Yeah, there's so much great stuff in what you just said. I think, first, I love the idea of peers as mentors. I think we sometimes overlook some of the people who we're closest to and can probably have some of the easiest and most valuable conversations with. And then manufacturing guilt. I love how you said that too, because we create that ourselves, and it's so easy to do. I'm a mother as well, and you're right. You either feel like you're not spending enough time working, or you're not spending enough time mothering, or whatever the case is. So yeah, setting
It's
boundaries is
exhausting,
so
right?
important. It is. It is. So your new role, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your new role, Vice President of Workplace Transformation. What does that mean exactly? And how do women figure heavily into that planning?
Yeah, it's an interesting title, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, so what I would say is it's really exciting, and what does it cover? And so when you look at workplace transformation or the future of work, I think all of us have been forced into a experiment over the last now coming up nearly a year since March. And I think and there's much of it that's been really difficult. And um, but one thing that it has done is it has probably forced the biggest change in how anybody works since the Industrial Revolution, and started to have us question things that we wouldn't have questioned before. We've been able to close the books, being remote. We've done board meetings remote. We've done performance appraisals remote. And so what that's done is it's opened up a whole set of possibilities, um, that say, what if we could take the good parts of what we've learned over the last year and think about really step changing the employee associate experience for the future, not just for a period of time in while we're dealing with COVID, but for good. And so what I love about this is it's enabling us to really think through, how do we get our work done in the most effective way. We're using the responsibility principle, using the efficiency principle, and really thinking through, as associates, how do we get our work done in the best way for us and the best way for Mars Incorporated. And we're not the only business doing this. There are many businesses, in fact, most businesses across the world are looking at what they've learned and seeing, how do we step change for our future so that we can offer more flexibility. And then you said, why is that more relevant for women? When we did many surveys and talked to over 1,000 people within Mars, and the sort of resounding message was 97% of them were looking for more than occasional flexibility in the way they worked. And um, obviously, depending on where you work, if you're working in a factory and you're working in a production line, or you're working in a vet clinic, then it's important that you have to do your work where the value is created. And for many of us, for our people, that's where the value is created. But for of the 32,000 people within Mars, the value can be created sometimes in the office and sometimes at home. And certainly for women, what we realize is the flexibility that can create, whatever life stage you're at, to be able to think through, how can I organize both where I do my work and when I do my work, so that it's basically I can be my best self at work and I can be my best self at home. So if I go back to thinking through, how do you kind of create your boundaries and set yourself up for success, the flexibility that we can offer in the future versus the past should be a real step change for all associates, but particularly for women.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, because I definitely do miss, being with other associates and coworkers and some of the travel. But I would absolutely miss a lot of the flexibility as well. So you've talked a little bit about how the majority of your career has really been more in the STEM space and primarily supply. What is that like to make that shift from science and technology now into this really people focused role?
Yeah, I'd say, what would I say? Pursuing a career in STEM um, doesn't necessarily mean that you're hunched over a computer or a microscope alone, relying only on your scientific intelligence. I'd say much of my career, and for many of those who I've worked with, a lot of our STEM associates are working in environments where you're working with other people, you are using your emotional intelligence, you're looking at problems in society, um, and you're trying to work through how to make a breakthrough. And so the transition is not necessarily as big as you might think. Um, I've always been pretty data driven. I think I make a lot of decisions from intuition, but I do like to back it up with data. And if I think about the work we've been doing on workplace transformation, we talk to over 1,000 users. We try to use design thinking to really think through what is the data that our associates are telling us over the last year, what's worked and what hasn't worked, and what can we take forward. And that's not that dissimilar from what you would do if you were trying to solve a scientific problem. So um, I haven't found it. I'm always been someone that's been excited and engaged around people. I'm a natural extrovert. And so the reason I was attracted to supply in the first place, I think, was because Mars manufactures over 90% of its own products. And therefore, you have a high percentage of our associate population that are in supply. And if you're wanting to work with people, you're likely to do a lot of that in supply. So um, I think wherever you are, it's always a mixture of IQ and EQ.
And Nikki, what would you say needs to change so that more women can reach their full potential?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this question, and there are many answers, but I was just reflecting on my career, and I've been in Mars for 29 years, and as I shared, most of it in supply. Um, I can say I've never worked for a woman, and um, I, you know, I wish I had, but I haven't. I've had many great role models, and I've had many great line managers who obviously were men. For me, one of the things that needs to change is for more men to feel empowered to be male allies. And so, what I mean by that is, um, I've certainly worked for people or worked around people who have been very comfortable to have conversations with me around, okay, you're coming back from maternity leave. How, what would you like to, how would you like to work? Are you feeling okay? And I've had others that have really struggled with those conversations because it's difficult or it's a little bit vulnerable or they don't know where the line might be.
Yeah, I think I've been very fortunate. I've had a really good combination of male and female leaders, but you're so right. Men have to be a part of this conversation, and not only a part of it, to your point, they really have to feel empowered to be allies and help drive the conversation.
And I think that's difficult. It's not easy. And therefore, giving the right support, the right thoughts about how to ensure we allow men to lean into that is the best.
And so we are just about to go into Women's History Month. And with that in mind, what would be the biggest wish that you have for young girls today, or maybe the number one piece of advice that you would have to offer?
Oh, my biggest wish. I think my biggest wish for young women of today, for me, and I call it, I hope I can say this, I call it my itty bitty shitty committee. So, in general, it's saying things like, oh, are you saying this right? Is this good enough? Is this clever enough? And my wish for women coming through is that that volume of that itty bitty shitty committee is lower than the volume it was for me.
Mhm.
Because I think and being able to understand what are the voices in your head that you can have that will really be more of a cheering station. Um, I think in general, not always, but in general, women tend to be very hard on themselves. And my wish is that for women coming up, they find a way to be more congruent, to be more their best selves, not because they're perfect, but just are able to reduce the volume of those voices inside their head that might get in the way of them enjoying and being the best selves they are, both at home and at work, and that it feels very integrated.
I'm glad you did share your itty bitty shitty committee. And it sounds way better when you say it. But because I think, like you said earlier, women like me, we look at you and we think, oh, she's got it all together. She's so confident. She has no questions about anything. And so sometimes it's just nice to hear that and to know that we all have a little bit of that, but that we need to push that back a little bit and have more of the cheerleader voice inside our head that says, you know what, you can do this. You are great at this.
Yeah, we can do hard things.
We can.
No, I'm still trying to work out how to deal with I think trying to deal with my 21-year-old and my 17-year-old in lockdown. So the problems change, but they don't go away.
Nikki, thank you so much for your time today. It has been such a pleasure hearing your story. And I know that your story will be one that inspires so many other women.
Thank you, Lisa. It's been fantastic. And I'm always inspired by everyone's stories. So I hope it encourages others to share. And it was Great to be here.
And that's a wrap on this episode of the Here to Be Heard podcast series. I want to thank Nici Bush for joining me today and sharing her life experiences and how we can overcome some of the challenges we face as women. Our hashtag Here to Be Heard campaign is not just for Mars Associates, but for women all over the world. So please visit beheard.mars.com to share your voice and vision for change. Mars will use this data to inform policies and procedures to help women to reach their full potential. And follow hashtag Here to Be Heard on your social channels to stay up to date on the latest news and stories. Don't forget to listen to the next episode of the Here to Be Heard podcast series, where there will be a new host, new guest, and new experiences shared. Thanks for listening. And until then, remember, the world we want tomorrow starts with how we do business today.